Well, welcome. And I'm glad to have you all here with us today as we're talking about calling and the different aspects of calling. And I'm happy to be interviewing Geoff and Ashley VanDragt. I'm wondering if Geoff and Ashley would be willing to introduce themselves.
Yeah, we would be willing.
Great.
I'm Ashley VanDragt. I am married to Geoff VanDragt. We are in our home right now, and we just put our two kids to bed, so we'll see if they actually stay in bed for the duration of this call. We live in Seattle, Washington, and we are both pastors of a campus ministry and also a church plant. Both of those take place in a really dense and urban neighborhood known as the University District here in Seattle. And we've known Michael for how many years?
More than 10.
Goodness, a long time.
Well,
You must have been about 12 when this all started.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I was an intern of Michael's many years ago, just after, well, I was still in seminary actually, and Geoff and I just got married. It was pretty fun.
It was fun.
We
All
found
right.
that.
Yes. And Ashley's from the Northwest, and Geoff is originally from Grand Rapids, Michigan, isn't it?
yeah, grew up in Grand Rapids and lived much of my life there. Spent 5 years overseas as a missionary. Came back for seminary. Came out with a Master of Divinity and a wife, and here we are, 12 years later.
Right. So I want to talk about your sense of calling. What would you say is your calling in life?
Yeah. So several years ago, I think this is even before I was an intern with you, Michael, I read a book called Each Little Bird That Sings, and it's by Deborah Wiles. It's actually a children's book, and it's delightful, but it has a dark premise. It's all about a family that they run a funeral home in a small town. And their family motto is that we live to serve. And the main character's name is Comfort, and her dog's name is Tidings. But this family is beautiful, and it has helped me think about calling and sort of like this family motto, because I think what we do, what our calling is that we live to serve. And that all of our titles in some way, our names, we're comfort. We're comfort in our neighborhood, we're comfort as pastors. That's who we are and what we're called to do.
Called to serve, serve other people, bringing comfort. That's good.
And tidings of good news that we, know about.
I was wondering if Tidings the dog was good.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question because it can be answered on so many different levels, right? Like on the one level, what is my calling? What does the Westminster Catechism say? To glorify God and enjoy Him forever. You could say that. You could say to love God and love my neighbor. I mean, there's all sorts of general descriptions of calling we could go to. I'm guessing that's not really what you're asking, though. Is that right?
Oh, that's fine, actually, because in the book Calling and Clarity, Doug Costello talks about that as general calling, something that's true for all Christians. To love God, to love their neighbors themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, in terms of vocational calling, I would have to say a couple of things. One is that it flows out of that general calling, and that the two are entirely inseparable, right? That you can't take on a vocational ministry calling and in any way neglect your general calling as a Christian. The two are bound up together. I've been reading lately the great book by Tish Harrison Warren, Liturgy of the Ordinary. And the whole book's premise is this idea of if our spirituality doesn't permeate the ordinariness of every day, then what is it really worth, right? And I think I've seen too many pastors crash and burn because there was this sort of divorce between their vocational calling into ministry from their just sort of personal call to be a Christ follower. And so for me, the two are bound up together. Not to say that there aren't specific calls to vocational ministry. I think Ashley and I can both say we've experienced that, but often they're not as clear or obvious as what we like to think they would be.
Yeah, well, that's good. So dive in a little bit about that. How did you gain that sense of calling, I mean, to be a pastor, or to work in a university setting, you know, to be a chaplain at the graduate school at the University of Washington?
Well, so I mean, for me, it's an interesting story. And Michael, you already know this. Like, I did not grow up in a Christian home. And so my parents were divorced, and my mom got remarried, and her new husband started taking us to church, and it was just a bizarre experience, and I did not enjoy any bit of it. But there were some girls in the church that I wanted to be friends with, and they went on a retreat, like a Christian retreat, and they invited me to go along, and I went because I wanted to be their friends. And that retreat started with an hour of prayer, probably because a kid was lost somewhere on the campground, because no youth pastor would be like, hey guys, let's pray now for an hour to like a room full of 16-year-olds. But they did that evening. And in that hour of prayer, I had a crazy conversion experience that I am a reasonable person and I can't reason it away. So I left there feeling like, I left that retreat feeling like there was very much a God who loved me. And I believed that so sincerely. But then I also believed in my 16-year-old mind that if there was a God who loved me and my life belonged to this God, then I must also be a pastor.
Wow.
And I brought it home.
So your call to faith in Jesus came out right with it, a call to be a pastor.
Mm-hmm. Same time.
That's amazing. I guess it happened to the Apostle Paul that way.
That's true. She's in good company.
Yeah. It's really remarkable that we are where we are, right? I mean, no 16-year-old should be like, hey, I'm going to be a pastor and actually keep going. But I think that testifies to what an actual vocational calling is, right? And God has opened all sorts of doors here to make this happen.
Yeah. So. Great.
I would say that mine was almost the exact opposite. I grew up in a Christian home. Had a couple years in college where I didn't consider myself a Christian. I went through a pretty dark period of doubt and such, but came back from that. Never had any interest in going into ministry, but graduated college, having studied to be a teacher, also having studied Spanish, and was invited to head up an English program in Latin America. And so moved out of the country. And upon arriving to the Dominican Republic, which was headed, everything fell apart. The job, the whole setup was it just fell apart. And so I found myself in a foreign country, having raised support to be there and not having a job. And in the short amount of time I'd been there, I'd gotten involved with the church, Dominican church. And when all of a sudden my job fell through, they asked me if I could help them with their youth ministry. And so I was like, well, I'm here. Sure. And that turned into 5 years where I kind of fell backward into ministry. And after that time, decided, well, it looks like I'm in ministry, so I should probably go to seminary or something. And so went back to go to seminary, met Ashley. But I feel like in terms of calling, mine has always been a bit of God sort of beating me over the head with it because I'm too stubborn to recognize it or too blind to see it. And so nearly every step of the way, I feel like my calling has largely been a result of circumstances orchestrated outside of my control to sort of push me in a direction. And then me eventually waking up to see what that direction is.
Terrific. Yep. God sort of, I was going to say dragged, but I'm not quite sure.
Kicking and screaming.
Yeah. Led you through a whole series of twists and turns into the place where you are today. Right. Good. So how about the relationship of your sense of calling to gifts? That's one of the big things that Koskela, who wrote the book that we're using, mentions in terms of one's sense of mission, what he calls missional calling, the overriding purpose in terms of our life. And he relates it strongly to our sense of gifts and our passions. So how about you? How does your sense of calling relate to that?
You want to speak to that first, or shall I?
You first this time. I've gone first the last 2 times.
Well, I found that there's sort of a refining process that happens the longer I'm in ministry. More of a self-understanding leads to a more focused ministry that flows more out of who God built me to be. And I think that the two of us are especially spoiled because we work as a team, and not just with the two of us, but there's one other ordained pastor and a worship coordinator on our team. And that really allows us to focus in on those things that we're gifted for. And so I feel like both of us are now working closer to our areas of giftedness than we ever have before. And that's a real gift, and not something that every pastor gets to choose to do, right? But it's definitely been like a years-long process of figuring out, oh, you know what, this is the thing that I'm especially good at. This is what I bring to the table. And it's both affirming of the things that, God has particularly gifted me to do, but it's also, there's a sense of humility that comes in, like, when I'm on a team with people and I can say, you know what, you're better at this than I am. God has given you a gift that God didn't give to me in abundance. And I'm going to defer, and to have that freedom to sort of work with other people who bring different gifts to the table has been a real gift.
That is really interesting to me. So that what you're saying is you didn't have your gifts all worked out by the time you were 21 or 22 years old.
I had no clue what I was good at when I was 21 or 22.
And also that they gained clarity in the context of the interaction with other people, right? Trying to work as a team for a certain ministry or a certain purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yes. Also probably pretty true to life for all of us, right?
I think so.
I'm a woman in ministry. And there were a lot of people who told me I shouldn't do what I wanted to do, what I felt called to do. And it can make you doubt yourself and the gifts that you have. So like I went into seminary determined to finish, but I think that was a lot due to my own stubbornness and to, several miracles that had gotten me there. But I was not confident that I had any of the gifts that were necessary to do ministry. But what I discovered going through seminary, through the voices of seminary faculty and other mentors, and just actually getting into the job of ministry, was that actually I do have what it takes to do this job. Because people were telling me that I had what it takes, but also I was seeing that in real time, right? The things that I was putting together, God was blessing that. People were coming together. People were being cared for. Yeah.
Great. So again, experience was how you saw it. Mm-hmm. As you stepped into it became clearer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
I don't know how else you do it. You don't know what you're good at until you try. You don't know what you're bad at until you try.
It can come out in weird ways, right? Like I mean, I discovered that I mean, we all preach, right? We preach and teach. But when did I discover that I could do this? It was when I was 16 and I did something super crazy, which was try to get a scholarship that required me to do a speech. And it was like a contest with other people, and I won the contest. Apparently we can do this. Maybe there's a gift there, you know? But you didn't know it until you tried.
Yes.
And also though, even though there's maybe like this like seed of a gift, you can sense that it's there. Some people affirm it, but you have to cultivate it, right? Actually, like some of these things that you might have in you, it takes a lot of work to tease out, refine, to be really good at something, to actually be able to say, I am gifted in this area. I mean, that's years of work, I think.
So you ever have a situation, and maybe Ashley, you were already referring to this, where you had a real sense of doubt about your own calling? Like, oh, I think I was totally mistaken about this.
Yeah. Go to seminary when you are 20 years old. Sit at a table with 30, 40, and 50-year-old something men and be like, hey, I'm going to be pastor like you guys. So full of doubts.
I think we chose to do ministry in a context where we are constantly being challenged with this thought of, really, is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? I mean, we planted a campus ministry on one of the biggest university campuses in the country. Pretty much everyone we work with is smarter than we are. Talk about doubting yourself. I sit down in rooms full of faculty with PhDs and like, I'm supposed to lead this group. But also, I mean, we're planting a church in one of the most secular cities in the country. And a city where you tell somebody you're a pastor, they just kind of look at you weird, like, well, what's that? So yeah, doubt is a daily reality for me. I don't think I've had a day recently where I didn't doubt whether or not this was the right thing to be doing with my life. Yeah, it's part of the call. Is to hold that tension.
Oh, okay, because I was going to ask how it gets resolved, but
It doesn't.
Well, it does, and it doesn't, right? I mean, it doesn't sense that like I have never felt before like the simple things of like my being a woman or my being a mother is a gift, but it actually is, right? And that it's also a part of my calling, because I get to inhabit the role of pastor in the neighborhood I'm in with a level of comfortability that my colleagues actually can't. Because who I am and what I say I am, it's kind of a disarming sort of experience for people to meet me as a pastor. I think people befriend us easier than they might if we looked a way that they might expect us to look, right?
Or if people met us and I was the pastor and she was my wife.
Right.
It's a different thing to say, no, we are co-pastors. Yeah. It makes actually what it does is it makes me safer to people, because I'm married to a woman who's a pastor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just get to do all sorts of weird things, like invite people over all the time, even though we don't know them. But, you know, I'm a woman pastor. This is what we do, I guess.
yeah.
But then you start seeing fruit in life, in ministry. And I think all of that is very affirming, you know? Mm-hmm. I think if we were not supposed to be doing the work that we are doing now, if we weren't truly called to it, the doors would be closing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or at least it would be harder in a way that it's like, this is just soul sucking and terrible. Right? And I do think like when we find ourselves in that place, then it's time to not be doing what we're doing.
Yeah. That was one thing. I was looking through the notes that you sent, Michael, and it said something in the, I think it was in the missional calling or the direct calling about people generally receive a specific direct call for life. It's like, this is what you will do now until you die.
Yeah.
And I think that for some people that's true. But I think more and more, especially for younger people these days, I mean, they say you'll have 7 professions by the time you retire. And I don't know that for everyone who goes into ministry as a vocation, the story is going to be different, right? I hope to work the rest of my life in ministry. I don't know if I will. And if I don't, I'm okay with that. Because my general calling doesn't change whether I'm in vocational ministry or not.
Yeah. And also, I mean, the degree to which your calling defines you, you got to keep it in check a little bit, right?
Absolutely.
There's a lot more to who I am than my work and my calling.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I am a friend, I am a neighbor. I am a person who sits on boards. I do a lot of stuff that makes me me and gives my life deep meaning and purpose that isn't directly related to this particular calling that I think God placed on my life.
And I think that's part of the beauty of the tradition that we all come from, the Reformed tradition, where we can affirm the sacredness of every calling, right? Like if I left ministry tomorrow and became a farmer, that wouldn't have any less value than what I'm doing now. And I think I could live with that. I think, Michael, you probably similarly know some pastors for whom it would be the greatest tragedy if they could no longer be a pastor. Because so much of themselves is wrapped up in that identity, right? And there's something beautiful about really embracing that pastoral identity, but can also have that dark side of being like, I don't know who I am if I'm not a pastor.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it happens at the other end of ministry or at the other end of a career. What happens when I retire?
Right.
I lost my identity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's right. I think it's really a good, healthy balance that you're talking about, that general calling that applies to everything and to everyone really has to undergird a sense of mission, some particular focus that you have, so that your job doesn't swallow up your identity.
Yeah.
That you're more than just whatever your job is, right?
Yep. We have this supervisor in our work, and there have been whole seasons, years. We're not in one of them right now because so much is happening with the church plant, and life feels very rich because of our calling and our jobs. But there's whole seasons where work has very much felt like work, and the supervisor is like, "Well, think about that. It's work. Like it's going to feel like work sometimes, which means it's not going to be this thing that is like, yay, all the time. It's just going to be kind of grueling at times." And I think that's like, oh yeah, that's good. So even if it's your calling, it can just still feel like work.
Yeah, I looked at the notes you sent, Michael, and there was one of these things talking about how if it's your calling, you should draw joy from it, right? At some level.
True.
And I think that's true, but that's where that distinction between just happiness and joy is very important, because my job doesn't always make me happy. Sometimes it makes me exactly the opposite. But I do get a deep sense of joy knowing that I'm doing something meaningful to which I believe I'm called,
right.
And which is actually having an impact on people's lives, even if I'm not always enjoying it.
Right. And if the call is to serve, I mean, right there, it's like, this is not going to be easy. This is going to be kind of laying your life down for others, following in the way of Jesus. which means, yeah, it's not going to make you rich. It's not going to make you, it's not always going to win you friends or fans. It's going to come with trouble, but that's a part of the call. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, I'd way rather have our life than something that is less meaningful. Also, Geoff, I am so impressed that you did actually read the notes, and I do not know when you had time to do that today. So,
in the 2 minutes before we got up.
good job.
Oh no. Will that affect your final grade?
I don't know.
So if you're going
It
to
affect anybody else's grade here listening to this, they'll all look at the notes.
if you were to change, or if you sense the shift in your sense of calling, well, who would you invite to try to discern that?
You.
Hey, thank you.
Were you talking to Michael or me?
Both of you. I was actually talking to Michael right there, but of course, no, I would invite my husband. There is this community of people that you trust to be wise, to know you, to be able to help discern, to make the distinction between this is the hard time, this is when your work is going to feel like your work. The good times are maybe on the horizon. Dig in. There's that small group of people, but that too has come with the cultivation of relationships, right? Like, that's years of work.
Yeah, I think it really, for me, is a small group of people. And I think it has to do with what we were talking about. I would trust people's opinion on this who have that healthy relationship to their call, who have that positive understanding of pastoral identity, not the unhealthy, my identity is wrapped up in being a pastor. And that's a relatively small cohort of people I would trust. And that's our 2-year-old in the background.
I was
He's
just
unhappy
thinking
that I'm not responding to him right now.
the alarm was just about going off there. I thought, well, that's really great. I think you've really fleshed out a wonderful picture of what how your vocation could be lived out, both the joys and the challenges, and how that came to be, and how it's going to be a different story for each person, but that God's still weaving your life together with your life's experiences, and it's really wonderful. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and I'm going to close off the recording right here.